Hello, you're listening to the Eric McKenna Project. Are you ready?
Right, and welcome to episode 6 of the Eric McKenna Project. And my guest tonight, which I'm very pleased about, is the very accomplished, I hope you like me saying that, I'll probably say that quite often this evening, Miss Mia Tarducci, Pittsburgh artist extraordinaire, and thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
Thank you so much for having me. This is quite an honor.
Oh, I don't know about that. We're just getting we're just getting started here. But I will tell you, like the gentleman I had in here a couple of days ago, Mr. James Houck, who's to me, from what I can see and from what I hear and people tell me, one of the top Pittsburgh designer ever. And he was kind enough to come on this show, and what a conversation. And I very much looking forward to tonight. I reached out to you. Your work, I've been watching your work on social media, on the web, and video content for a long time. Your work kind of speaks to me. I love abstract. I love the colors, and I didn't think you would do it, so I sent this rambling email that went way too long. And of course, I get this three words back. I'll do it, or I'm game. So I must have said something in there that convinced you to try this out. So I appreciate it.
And I'm really excited to do it. So
cool.
I'm happy to be here.
All right. So we initially connected over this really interesting video that I saw online, that they were extracting a very large piece of your artwork out the side of what I assumed was your studio.
Yes.
I've gone on to learn that was your studio.
Yes.
So before we even talk anything about your history and love of art, talk about that. What was going on? What was I witnessing, at least on video?
Oh, drama. You are witnessing drama. Self-inflicted drama. No, so that piece that is now at the airport is a 7-foot by 24-foot painting. And to backtrack a little bit to sort of give you a reason for the existence of that painting and the size of it, about a year and a half ago, I guess it was, I exhibited down in Miami during Art Basel.
Okay.
And some pretty prestigious people came into our booth. They saw my work. The work was too small. Now, mind you, the work was 4 feet by 12 feet. And to hear that was too small was like, what? Music to my ears.
Certainly.
So they said, listen, we're going to go home. We're going to make some measurements. We'll come back at you with what we're looking for, and we'll see if you can do it. So long story short, all these a couple months went by with back and forth, and we settled on this size of a 7-foot by 24-foot painting for their dining room.
For their dining room?
For their dining room.
That had to be one hell of a client.
Yeah. So I start this piece, but what I do when I work on commissions is typically, and I don't know if this is a practice that I'll continue much longer, but I certainly have done it up to this point, I'll do more than one, and typically it's 2. I sometimes have done 3 and 4 for any one project. And I do that because, and I say 2, I mean in the exact same size. Because when you work a commission, it's really size driven, at least for me. Content-wise, I have a little more reign than some other folks might have in their practice because I am an abstract artist. So you can't really fully direct that process, nor would I take a client that was trying to do that. But so the size was this 7-foot by 24-foot thing. And so I did 2. And I have a wonderful studio in which I can do that. My studio's in Homewood. It's in a fabulous building. The building is run by Bridgeway Capital, that is a nonprofit, and they support practices like me working in underserved areas. So it's a really fantastic building, and they give me a lot of support through just having this space. It's 2,200 square feet. So I worked on these 2 paintings, and the first one was exactly what the client wanted. We extracted it through the side of the building. Extraction
is the appropriate word.
Yes, it was. So what we did, we did try when I first made the stretcher bar, because I ordered it from Soho, and it came and we put it together. And I say we because there are some fantastic people in my building that helped me do it. And the building itself is full of makers in Pittsburgh. It's an incredible building, worthy of looking into, 7800 Susquehanna. So my friends helped me build this stretcher bar.
What's a stretcher bar?
Well, it's actually a strainer, but
what's that?
It's the bones of your painting.
Okay,
So I
okay.
will stretch the canvas over it.
Okay, is
and
it
that's
the frame?
Why it's
The
called.
frame?
Yeah, it's the
Okay,
frame
okay.
underneath the canvas.
Okay, which is
So,
obvious. That's unusually big.
Yeah, that's crazy big.
Okay.
So we put it together, and then we attempted to take it out of the building through the
Traditionally
through the freight elevator. We trapped somebody under the stretcher bar and the floor of the freight elevator, and we thought,
Nice.
yeah, that's not going to work. So they said, well, what are you going to do? And I thought, oh, I'm not going to worry about it right now. So we just take it back into my studio. And my initial thought was, well, I'll take it through the window because they are replacing the windows in the building, and they're not going to be so mad at me if I take out a window, right?
Okay.
And then I thought, do I really want to do that? It might be a better idea to go out the side of the building through the cinder block.
Literally.
Yes, because then I will have like this permanent I call it the portal. I'll have this permanent portal by which I can extract all these other amazingly big projects that I'm clearly going to be working on after this, right?
Yeah, full disclosure. Mia invited me in. We had coffee to discuss the show, and she was kind enough to invite me into the studio, which is impressive. And not having a great knowledge of artist studios and the like, I was amazed by how big it was.
Yeah.
I'm amazed by the pieces that were hanging there, I will tell you. But then I saw that sliver of concrete missing.
Right.
I said, that's where it went out.
Yes.
That is where it went out.
9-foot sliver of concrete. That is right. And now I have a little rolly thingy in it. So now I can just roll things right out the side of the building. Now, I am on the second floor, which makes it a little tricky.
That was my next question.
So what we do, and I say we, because again, the same crew of amazing people in the building help me
Sure.
out. But we get a U-Haul and back that up to the side of the building. It works as a platform. And then we roll out the piece. And we've learned this by extracting the first one. We didn't have a roller. We didn't have the necessary things that we needed. We did not also know if it was going to take wind. That was the fear, that this whole thing was just going to be, up in the air. It's essentially a giant sail.
Right.
So,
right.
We had
how
a
much
crane.
thicker was the frame as opposed to a standard? That was a question for me because I knew that just the sheer weight of it.
Oh, the
right?
weight is, it's about 300 plus pounds. I actually I employed this guy, Sam. He would come in once a day and help me move the painting. So
you could paint.
So I could paint it. So he's an incredible guy. So so he'd come up once a day for an hour, and I'd be like, Sam, let's just, because I am used to manipulating paint, and when I say that, I usually use a terpenoid or some other medium to make the paint do interesting things rather than just sit and use
texture?
a brush.
Is it more texture?
It's not. No, the texture is a different tool that I use to do that. It's more like thinning out the paint to move it. Almost in this sort of organic way.
I think I understand that.
Yeah, I don't know.
No.
It's also like you could drip with it and all kinds of things. So anyway, when we realized that this thing was not going to go out a traditional way from the building,
right?
And I realized that I wanted it permanent, I just said, I'm going out the side. And
you did.
And yes, and there was a gentleman in the building that put that hole in the side of the building for me. The manager did come through. And he was properly, advised prior to the incident of the whole being. Yeah, right. And he did say I had some big balls. He did say that, which nobody would refute.
For that, I don't doubt whatsoever.
Nobody would
Well, they
refute
always say
that.
it's easier to ask forgiveness and permission, right?
Yeah, but I did ask, well, I didn't really. I stated I was going out the side of the building, and then I did.
You just didn't say which way you were going outside the building, right?
It's fine.
So how did that piece end up in the airport?
So right now they have a wonderful program at the airport wherein they display many local artists and artisans through I'm not really sure what the name of the program is. Maybe we should find that out.
That's all right.
But it's a great way to highlight what's happening in Pittsburgh right now and to sort of introduce whoever's coming into that process and what's going on. There's a lot of makers that are really doing some amazing things in Pittsburgh. Many of them are in my building. You can access some of the information by going on to monmade, monmade.org, and see Monmade, Monongahela Made. Yep. To see some of the really cool things that are, I think people aren't, it's not really in your face. It's a little under the radar, but these things have been happening for years. And I think we really have a great community of both artists, artisans, craftsmen, makers, and producers. So anyway, they highlight those at the airport. And I was one of those people that they chose to highlight.
Yeah, at 24 feet.
It was 24. Yeah, and they were not really prepared for me when I pulled up with the 26-foot U-Haul.
It's 24 feet.
It was like, okay.
Well, I noticed too that there was people taking selfies with the and I want to encourage anyone,
please, and send them to me.
Absolutely right.
Yes.
Absolutely right. That's Mia Tarducci.
Yes.
Now you have
I have a website.
You have a website, and you also have I found one social media.
Instagram.
I'm sorry,
Mia
Instagram,
Tarducci.
but you have 2 Facebooks, right?
I should have one.
Okay, I thought I saw 2 there.
There might be 2.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I can't. I can't remember if I shut the other one down.
No, they both seemed active. But anyways, we're encouraging people to take selfies of themselves with the artwork and send it in to Mia.
I would love that. I have had.
Send it to me too. I'd like to have that too.
A few dozen people have done that so far. Some people just send it privately in my text messages, but I love it. It makes me so happy.
Absolutely.
And when I installed it, which was so cool to me, was it was pretty quiet in the general area when we were installing. There wasn't anybody in line or anything. It was right by the TSA, by the way, in ticketing. But there was this little boy with his parents, and as soon as it was installed and all the hoopla had subsided and people were going back to work, this little boy just ran up to the glass, and he wasn't banging. He was just kind of rubbing his hands along, like
kind of wanted to feel it.
Yeah, and it was a really awesome experience for me.
You.
And the dad was like, get your hands off the glass. And I was like, no. And he interacted with the painting for a good 10 minutes. And I thought, wow, that's amazing.
Powerful.
It really was. It really was.
That's the word.
And I think that I've seen this with a lot of children with my work. It's instant for them because they're not trying to react to something they don't understand. They're just reacting very organically. And I think adults really have a harder time with abstract work because they want to relate it to something that needs to have some sort of meaning or and not that it doesn't, but I'm just saying that a lot of people feel like they need to have I don't know if that's it so much as I think that a lot of people need to have to relate to it in terms of the natural world. And so they want to see a landscape, or they want to see a field of flowers, or whatever it is that they want to see, and that makes it relatable. And I totally get that. There's a lot of people that just appreciate it for whatever it is. But that's always been interesting to me because I think a child just immediately responds the way the child wants to respond. So that's really cool, right? So,
but this
little kid
your color is amazing.
It's the color. The color is really, I think, it's a lot of my work is driven by color, but then I have a lot of work that's very muted, and even
there's some
good
hanging in your
portion
studio
that's
that was
black
muted.
and white. Yeah. So I do have lots of bodies of work, I should say that. And the 2 pieces that I did that were both 7 feet by 24 feet are very different pieces. They're from different series. So the one that wound up going down to Palm Beach it actually did not wind up in their dining room because we brought it down there and I saw it in the dining room and my heart sank because it felt like a mural instead of a painting because it was so large in this space. And I thought, oh, this is not great. But the house manager, because we all need one of those.
I'd love to have one of those.
Right?
Where can I find one of those?
The house manager got on the phone with the owner and said, I think there's a better place for this piece. So it wound up going into the room next door. The room next to it is significantly larger, same expanse of wall space, but just much larger, so you can really take it in as a painting rather than it feeling like, oh, that's something that was put on a wall. So it made all the difference. It was very nice of him to intervene. So
that must have felt amazing to go into your client's house, which I'm sure in other instances. But such a magnificent piece like that, to go down there and to see it actually installed.
Yes, it was really an experience, and the whole process of the extraction and getting it down to Miami or into Palm Beach and going down there and being on site when that was happening was just kind of a little surreal too. So
was it air freighted? Was it
no?
trucked?
It was in a truck.
It was trucked.
We had to crate it. It was basic crating, and then we got it out the side of the building into the truck, and then it went. And I got on a plane and followed it. So I was very glad to be there when it came.
A little nervous through that process?
Yeah, very nervous through the process because I just wanted it on the wall. And I almost really, quite frankly, I was a little bit irritated with the house manager for like saying anything because I was like, just put it on the wall. Just put it on. And every single wall in this place was done with its Venetian plaster, and every single wall was done by a different artist. So once you put a screw in that wall, it is done.
Right.
You're done.
Right.
So I'm pretty glad it's in the living room because it's there now.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's and I just was overtaken when I went to see it this past week at the studio, and I remember walking out to my car and being amazed. I was not overwhelmed, but I was very impressed by the size of things, because those types of sizes of canvases were nothing I've ever experienced before, and that was a whole new dimension. And I like it. I've often thought many pieces that I've appreciated from other artists weren't large enough, and I've always thought that the magnificence of something that really resonated with me was always a little bit on the small side.
Yeah, so that's interesting that you say that, because I think, and I should say, to give you some history, I come from a family of artists, and both my parents went to Rhode Island School of Design. So I was always exposed to art throughout my entire life, and I really don't know life without that being a major part of it. And I can remember from the time I was a very little child that it was the large work. It was the work that I felt like I could step into, that I became a part of its world rather than it being a part of my world, that resonated the most with me. And I think that's part of the reason why I paint the way I do. Another part of the reason why I paint the way I do is because I grew up by the ocean. And I was always a little bit of an oddball. Still am.
I can relate to that.
But so I never really quite felt like I fit in. And the way that I would, I guess, process that for myself as a young person was to go and sit by the water and sit on the edge of the ocean. There was this one part in particular that I would sit wherein when I looked, even sort of peripherally, it was all ocean. And it was like the ocean could just consume me at any moment. And not to say that I wanted that to happen, but to say that I was not that significant. I was this little thing. Look how vast this world is in front of me. And when you think of it that way, then you can think of your problems as being even more insignificant. So that was sort of my therapy, to sit there and say, you think you're such a big deal. You're nothing, right? You're nothing in this grand scheme of things.
You can realize as a small child.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess at the time I was probably a teenager, but to realize that was really, it was a good thing. It was a good learning. It was something that I take with me that really is a good way of putting things in perspective. So
the expansiveness of the ocean.
Yeah. And so I guess the size of my canvases is a reflection of that for me, that, these are so big. You're kind of this little thing in the face of that. And you're kind of this little thing in the face of your passions and in the face of the things that move you, right? So I started working big almost right away, and I just haven't looked back. And I did not know if there was a market for that or anything like that. I just painted. And the largest piece I ever did, which wasn't the 7-foot by 24-foot.
That was not the largest piece?
No, that was the largest single piece that I've done. But the largest piece I've ever done was 5 feet by 62 feet. And it was, right. It covered 4 walls. Almost the entirety, but obviously there are doors, so you have to get in, of the Pittsburgh Center for the Arts. And it was a piece that I did for the Emerging Artists of the Year show in 2014. And my goal for that was to talk about being immersed in that creative process. And so when a viewer came in and stood in the room, peripherally, they were still in the middle of this painting.
They were immersed in it.
Yes. And so my hope or my thought for that piece was not to just see it as a 2D abstract, but to see it as experiential, like you are participating in that process of being immersed. So that was my goal with that piece. I hope it was successful for somebody, but it certainly was for me. So
I've always been very fond of Salvador Dali's somewhat bizarre work. And the quote that I remember the most from the many interviews he did, or the pontifications that he gave, strange man. It's a very strange man, and not a man that I could really appreciate as a human being, but I kind of was interested in his work. He said that he tried to create works of art where it took the appreciator a while to absorb it all. And he said size was a component of that in terms of the material, but the size was a part of that. Is that
right?
Do you kind of feel that in your work as well?
I just think it's funny because his piece, what is it? Persistence of memory? Persistence of time?
Persistence of time.
I think it's persistence of memory, but it's the melting clock. So
yeah,
everybody thinks it's time.
Right.
It's like this big.
I know.
It's so tiny.
I know.
And so that sort of disturbed me when I saw it in person, because I think it's actually bigger in some of the...
did you see that at the museum in Florida? Where is that piece located at?
It's in the MoMA.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, so I've always loved Dali's work as well. I really appreciate so many of the different genres that do exist. I mean, surrealism is so cool. Not something that I do, not something that I...
What was the elephants? Remember the elephants? Long legs?
Oh, yeah. God, I don't know what the name of that one is. Now, see, this is what I was saying. I have zero art history, and you're like...
That doesn't qualify you to have to be a great artist, right?
No, I mean, actually, and I was talking about this with somebody the other day about, not having being a self-taught artist as I am. I mean, to some degree, I could say I'm not totally self-taught because I grew up with artists, but they always forbade us from taking art classes because they were like, this is a tough life kind of thing, and you don't want to have to struggle the way that, a lot of artists struggle.
The starving artist.
Yeah, the classic quote, which we will circle back to, by the way, because that will play into some other things that I have to talk about. But
look forward to it.
But yes, so I have two brothers, one's older, one's younger, and my older brother and I were not allowed to take any art classes in high school or anything. And yet we both became artists. And then my younger brother, by the time he rolled around, they were like, whatever. So he went to Rhode Island School of Design and became a glassblower.
Typical parenting,
right.
Glassblowing, that's an art.
Yes. Yeah, he's a glassblower. So I don't know what I was saying. To have more or less been self-taught is interesting because I really developed whatever I developed completely organically on my own without any sort of direction, which, is good and bad. I don't have some of maybe the technical proficiency that I would otherwise have if I went to art school. But at the same time, I didn't have any professor or anybody that I was sort of emulating. And so I really could take everything.
No limits.
Yeah.
Open palette, right?
It's interesting. Yeah. And no way is wrong or right. I mean, I think art school is very valid and has I think it's really important to be technical.
In what way? Help someone who doesn't understand that. How is art school, because you're an abstract artist, so explain to me how you see value in a quote unquote rigid curriculum.
Well, I really wouldn't know because I didn't go to art school, but I'm sure if you had somebody here that had gone through the process, they could give you a lot of reasons why it's very valid to go to art school. I mean, that could be just a larger discussion about continuing education as a whole and why certain things might be less, maybe it's better to just go out and do your thing. But I think that there is a lot to be learned. And the history is important, even though I am woefully lacking in my art history knowledge. It is important, and it is I think that's probably maybe one of the more primary reasons to go and pursue that. and to understand techniques and to understand materials, because materials are very different
That
from
makes sense.
all the different. And, much like when a person is in going through the process of becoming a doctor, they have to try out all the different, various things. Like they can work with infants, they can work with the elderly. They try to, see where they feel most passionate, right? And I think in art school, that does allow you to do that. Is it sculpture? Is it glass blowing? Is it painting? Is it, materials are interesting. And I never really had that, so I couldn't tell you. I mean, I went directly to oil paint because it just seemed...
Resonated with you.
Yeah, it did. But, who knows what would have happened if I had gone to art school? I don't know. Maybe I would... maybe performance art would be the thing. I have no idea.
Again, there's no format to the show, so I'm probably, in my mind, I had a way I wanted to proceed, but let me just jump into it.
Sure.
When we were discussing the other day in your studio, you mentioned to me that you used the word, the word feeling came out a lot.
Mm-hmm.
You have to feel it, and I raised the question to you. I say that. I raised the question to you. I said, how do you know when a piece is done?
Yes.
And let's talk a little bit about that, because I'm not an artist, so I referenced it in guitars. I think I mentioned it to you, where there were times when the product, and I'm staring at one over there now, where the product that we did looked great. Something was gnawing at me, and then it went out on stage, and I'm like, that's unfinished. There's nothing I can do about it.
Right.
So
see, I would have a very difficult time with that, because in your situation, you're designing it, but then somebody else is fabricating it, right?
Yeah, correct.
So, you're not totally in control of the process. At some
not
point,
at
you
all.
have to hand it off, right? And I don't have to do that, which is a little bit of a difference.
Sure,
so
it's a big difference.
It's a huge difference. So, but how do I know when something is done? And what I had said to you is, I have certainly sold work that I have not believed was finished.
Really?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
But
that's an admission.
Because, sometimes I just feel like, there's just something missing there, but I don't know what it is. But somebody loves it. It resonates with somebody. And so I have sold work like that. How do I know when it's done and it's an abstract piece? I spend a lot of time sitting with my work in my studio and just contemplating it and looking at it really in every possible way. And when I know it's done is when the idea of putting even the smallest bit of paint on it gives me a stomach ache. It's a visceral reaction. It's like, I can't touch that because I will get sick if I touch that. So that's really, for me, that's how I know it's done. And I've had paintings, this we spoke about, I have had paintings that have taken years to complete because I start them and I just know they're not right. And sometimes they make me very angry. And so I will
turn them around.
They're facing the wall.
I found that very interesting.
They are in timeout, as I say, and they can stay that way. There was a piece, the piece actually that's hanging in Federal Galley down in the north side in Pittsburgh is one of those pieces. And I think because I struggled with that piece so much, and that piece took about 2.5 years to complete.
Wow.
I love that piece. There's a special place in my heart for it because it really fought me the entire way. And I do feel a lot of my, maybe even all of my pieces, quite frankly, there's sort of like the genesis, the birth, if you will, of like when you stretch it and you put the gesso, which is the primer on, and you have this white canvas. So that's like, it's like all the possibility, right? As soon as you put one thing on it, so many possibilities change. It just becomes narrower and narrower and narrower.
Right.
And so there's always, not, again, that's a big word. There often is a point in which the painting is just wrong. And
after you put days into it sometimes?
Yeah, or weeks or even a year, like I said. But it feels like it's fighting me. And the reason it's fighting me is because I've put all these expectations at a certain point into it. And it feels, as a mother of 4, very much like the relationship between a parent and child. And so I call this phase adolescence because it's fighting me and I'm fighting back, and neither one of us is acquiescing, right? And it's just like, okay, how do you get beyond that?
Right.
And usually the way that I get beyond that point where it's just a battle is when I just let go of my expectations of what's going to happen. And I think that can be a fair parallel with parenthood, is when you let go of that expectation of what should happen. And when I do that, the painting usually starts to inform me of like where it's going and what that should look like. And not to say that I envision the end game at that point. I don't. I just sort of like go with it more instead of directing it. So that's another part of the process that's very interesting to me. And like I said, I think it's the majority of paintings I go through this process with, probably not everyone. Some paintings are a little more driven by the actual processes that I have to go through to get there. Like the paintings that I feel are more they have this vibe of being sort of ethereal waterscapes. Mm-hmm. There are processes that I go through with like mixing mediums with the paint to get there. So that's a little more driven by things that I do with the paint rather than just this emotional
technique.
Yeah, rather than this emotional pouring out of the abstract expressionist.
So here's a question I'm sure that a lot of people that don't really understand art would probably ask you, and that is, someone commissions a piece from you and you're an abstract painter, and obviously you probably wouldn't want to take a commission if they're very dictatorial and kind of what exactly they want, because what's the point of
I don't do that.
Where's your appreciation for your artism, whatever that word is, your artistic work? If you can be that dictatorial, it's almost like paint a picture of my cat and he looks like this and here's a picture.
Sure.
That's not what you do.
Right.
So.
And there are people that do that, and it's great, and that's where I direct them.
Oh, no, absolutely right. There's nothing wrong with that at all. I know a few.
Right.
What's going on in your life at that moment? Does that color and texturize your output?
Yes, absolutely.
That's an admission.
I can even say I can point to certain pieces even and say, this piece helped me work through this particular moment in my life, and what that moment was.
Then.
It's super cathartic. Yeah, I mean, it's like I get to paint my emotions on a regular basis.
Yeah, that's something that's
pretty incredible.
Yeah, that does seem incredible.
And the fact that people will then buy those and then have their own emotional experience with them is just even more incredible. It's this continuation of my process into a whole nother thing. And I always say, like, it's this sort of silent dialogue between the person creating the thing and the viewer or the patron, and it's like there's never an end to the story, because everybody that looks at it is going to have some sort of different interpretation.
Correct.
And that makes it living to me, and which is awesome.
Yeah, it's almost it breathes.
Yes.
The painting breathes. So as we're sitting in the studio, this was the photo. This is the painting that I wanted to show you there in the corner.
I thought so. Yeah. Yeah.
So that was done by the musician Paul Stanley, and it was one of many pieces he was producing at the time. And I didn't know much about, even less than I know today, on art. However, as someone looking to acquire a piece in some capacity, potentially, maybe, that resonated with me. That work is called Scream, and he ironically painted that while going through a divorce. I was, I didn't know the background, but I inherently was going through a divorce, and without even knowing the history of it, when I looked at the pieces that were in that the gallery, that one spoke to me. Like, wow, that is like kind of how I'm not feeling it anymore. But man, a couple months ago, that was me. Yeah. And so again, what I was feeling and probably what he was feeling when he painted that probably completely different in some degree. Or there were elements of difference. Because we
all bring our own stories.
Elements
to
of difference,
yeah.
Right? But I thought, wow, that's pretty impressive that he can sit back as a painter, and what you just said, where I can put my emotions into this, and it has a parochial meaning to me, but it could mean a variety of things to other people, but Endless. It still resonates with them.
Right.
So it breathed its own story depending on who's viewing it.
Yes.
And that's powerful to me.
Awesome.
That's very powerful to me. And in a very more finite way, when we did guitar work, the shape of the instrument was a big thing to me, but the artist kind of had an idea what they wanted. To me, it was more the aesthetics, the colors, the way the trim, the abalone stone, the mother of pearl, the things, the accoutrements of it. The specs were very appealing to me. Had no formal artist background, but I kind of knew visually what I wanted to see. And I would be interested that sometimes it meant different things to different people.
Absolutely.
And that was very rewarding. But it took a while for me to really take that in and understand that. And later in my career, I'm like, wow, that design there with that black and that natural maple, very simplistic, it really resonated with this guy, and he told me the story. And then someone else would tell me the same guitar meant something different to them. And it was, so I kind of understand, but probably not on the broad scale that you have. I can kind of understand to some degree.
I don't think you need the broader scale. That is exactly it. And
I
whether or not you have
validation too.
Exactly. And whether it's 1,000 people that say that to you or one person that says that to you, it's all the same. I mean, I think it's really, if I only ever heard that from one person, like that this moved me, that would have been gratification enough. It's really, because at the end of the day, this really is for me. And it's just kind of icing on the cake for this to be moving other people, and for them to say it to me is
There's more integrity, I think, with artists, and I can see it in your work. When I walked into your studio, from my vantage point, it was pretty apparent that your work is extremely personal to me, and there's probably a million stories behind everything that went into each of those creative. Whereas I have been exposed on a limited basis to artists who were just cranking out work because they knew there was a receptive audience there because of their popularity already in another field. Sure. And I'm not knocking anyone's success or their pursuit of capitalism. God bless you. Right. But there was so much more depth and realism in what was hanging on the wall in your studio than I've ever seen before, and that it was very striking to me. I really, that was really, and I guess maybe the sheer size of your work as well too. That was something I've just never seen before. That's so we talk about getting immersed into it. That's when I would walk over to the wall and like stare at a piece for 10 minutes. It took me 10 minutes to really even feel like I was grasping it all. Yeah. And that's different. That's way different.
See, that's great. That's another validation for me. And when I say that, I mean, I love the way people have interacted with my work. It makes me feel like what I'm doing is useful and beautiful, and has a place. And it's not controversial work. It's not work that's asking you to question the political environment or anything like that. It's just there. And it exists in the way that it exists. And to have people be moved by that, even though it doesn't have a question or it doesn't suggest something to you other than it being, is pretty awesome. To your point or to what you said about storytelling and everything, sometimes what I find fascinating in my work is that when I finish a piece and I step back, and again, with the size, sometimes I'm on ladders to do my work. And so I can get it. Right. You're right up, my face is right here, and I'm working on something. Sure. And when I step back and I see how it all relates to one another, I'm like, well, this is kind of telling me a story. And the piece that's currently at the airport right now was one of those pieces. Again, it was developed alongside the other piece that had a client already. But I would come in every day and just go to town on this piece. And I didn't know, there was no directive. There was no, with the piece that I had done for the client, I did have studies. So a study is like, almost like a prototype for what will come. And I don't
draw that on paper?
No, I painted it. And that's not typically what I would do, because I do feel like everything should be super organic and in the moment. But this was one of the pieces that was process driven, so I gave them an idea. It was just a loose idea of what the larger piece would look like. It didn't ultimately have a lot of the same elements, but I think it was excuse me. close enough that they understood the direction, if you will, of that I was going in with that piece. So that was definitely a piece that sort of had an, not necessarily, oh, this is going to look like this in the end, but it had a direction. Whereas in the other piece had no direction. I was staring in front of a 7-foot by 24-foot canvas. What was I thinking? So the
world's my oyster.
Just like, what the hell? Like, I couldn't get to the top by myself. I'm not that tall, so I'd have to have a ladder to get to the top. Never mind, like this expanse of just open canvas.
Right.
And so every day I would come in, and I was actually going through a fairly difficult time in my life when I was painting this, and it was like, talk about cathartic. I mean, I was coming in and I was just going to town, and I was using the color, and I was feeling everything about that piece, and it was a big mess. It was just a big mess. And I would stand back and I'm like, well, this is very reflective of my life right now. And
that's honesty.
Right. And so I didn't know what was going to happen with that, and I didn't worry about it. I try not to worry about these things that really there's no point in worrying about. But I would come in every day and I would attack it from a different perspective, because every day I was coming in with a different perspective.
Right.
And eventually, again, when it went through that adolescent phase of just like being so hideous to me, and I just didn't want to, not that adolescents are hideous. let me backtrack
They
there.
can
No,
be.
just to say that, like, it was a difficult time with this painting.
Sure.
And I didn't know where it was going. And then I found myself oddly having dreams about this painting and going into my studio with a renewed sense of direction, and it started to make sense. And these parts of the painting that were so disjointed, and when you're talking about 24 feet long,
I can't imagine.
Disjointed doesn't work. It's just chop it up into a bunch of paintings then. So
how do you get the continuity over such a large plot of canvas?
Well, I just think it was the letting go. So when I came in and just sort of started to let it go and work, just on these areas that made sense, and then they started to make sense together. And then once they start to make sense together, then everything sort of just flows from that. And when I was finished with it, when I had the moment where I was like, if I put one more drop of paint on this, I'm going to throw up.
Right.
So when I was finished and I stepped back, I thought, wow, this painting is actually very narrative, and it's telling me something about my life right now that I needed to, quite frankly, hear. And since
it's actually speaking back to you.
It was totally speaking to me and telling, reflecting sort of the journey that I was having. And now, even to say everybody having all these viewers means that you have an infinite amount of possibility with the meaning of things. Even now, when I go back and revisit this painting and I look at it, it has a different meaning to me now. So it's constantly telling me a different story. And I think that that's one of the reasons why I really feel very akin to that particular piece, the one that's in the airport. It's really something that is extremely personal to me on many levels, and I am very proud of that piece, and I'm glad that it's resonating with people.
How long will it be there?
I will be there, as far as I know, until the end of May or maybe June. And then I hope that I can find another place for it, because I don't want to have to put it back through my portal.
But you could.
I can.
Well, the walls that I saw in that place were, you got a lot of projects and work.
I do. I have a lot of commissions, and I'm working on a lot of pieces. I just got a fairly big one that down the line I'll be able to say where it's going.
That's fine.
But
That's fine.
It's really,
that's fine.
It's a good one.
How about the frustration level? We didn't talk about that a little bit. I mean, you touched on it, but I would imagine it must be infuriating to work on something for a long period of time and then wake up one day and come in, and hopefully it's nothing that's going on in your life that gives you a bad attitude toward it, but I'm guessing that could happen.
Sure.
But you look at something and you're like, for lack of a better phrase, that's shit. That's rubbish.
Oh, yeah.
What have I been doing? What have I been doing for the past 3 weeks? And then what is it, a situation where you just white it all out? What do you do? You throw the canvas away? What do you do?
Well, it depends.
Okay.
Certain series, I will unstretch the work and I don't really throw it away. I have a graveyard in my in my studio of pieces that I just don't feel made it.
You're not feeling the love from them right now.
I'm not feeling the love. I'm not feeling like anything I do to it could improve that.
Do you go back and revisit them ever?
No, typically
that is
no.
the
I don't know why
wasteland.
I keep them, quite frankly. I think I think in the back of my mind, I've always had this idea that I would do something with them ultimately. I don't know what that is, but I do that with all of my tools too. I keep all of them when they become useless to me. And my tools become pretty useless to me pretty early on because I use these plastic sort of straight edges. And once they become nicked in any sort of way, they have a striation that I don't like, so I don't use them. So, but they're beautiful because they have all these colors, and I think, I'm gonna.
I'll tell you one thing. I saw a heck of a lot of tubes of paint.
There's a lot.
A collection of tubes of paint that was almost like a small mountain. People.
Yeah, there's a small mountain. I use a lot of paint, a lot of oil paint, and I am not the tidiest of artists, but I do have quite a bit of amount of paint
there, right?
And I don't know. I think there's some really, really organized artists. Not that I think I know there are some really organized artists, and it's amazing to me when I go to their studios and I think, how do they work this way?
Yeah, but are they really immersed? Is the question.
No, yeah, totally. It's just their own process, right? I mean, we're all different, and sometimes the organization is a big part of the process for people's immersion. So it's not me. I couldn't possibly work that way, but but I appreciate it in other people. Well, and then I hire them to come and organize me.
Like the gentleman, they were supposed to come in and tidy up before, right?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
And actually, if you came in today, you'd see that it was very organized. I walked in, I was like, wow, holy cow, it's a completely different
maybe
studio.
too organized, huh?
Yeah, where was that thing that I had on the floor right here? No. So, frustration with work. I often get frustrated with my work. I often
do you go into funks? Do you go into highs?
Sure.
Is it an up and down? Is there a cyclical nature to art?
There isn't. Well, I mean, I can't speak for everybody. For me, there isn't. It's not really cyclical. It is though driven by, I think, a whole host of things. What's happening in my life? What's happening in the work? Is there a a lull in the in people being patrons? I mean, I think it's really hard to be an artist whose income is and survival, if you will, is dependent on their studio practice. I'm lucky in so much as I don't have to have another job, that it is, working just through my studio, but it's also a roller coaster. I mean, and you don't really know where that's going to lead at any point. It's a different form of entrepreneurship that I think is... It's interesting. It's not as I don't think entrepreneurship in general is very predictable necessarily until you get
it's not.
Right. So So, but this is a whole nother level, right? The various factors that are at you all the time, and I'm a business of one, so it's all driven by what I do. It's all driven by what I can do. So that can be rather nerve-wracking as well. But I don't really think I could do anything else. This is who I am.
You've been doing it for quite a while.
Yeah, for a bit. So not like, it's a little over a decade, yeah.
So let's talk about that. Let's rewind history a little bit here and get a feel for how you got to Pittsburgh. I mean, you're obviously a mother of 4. Beautiful family, by the way. I saw the photos. You're very blessed. What about a typical day? Like, I mean, obviously you've got these 4 children you're raising, single mom right now. So there's obviously got to be considerable structure to that aspect of your life.
Yeah, school's great. That's the structure.
Well, that's what I mean. Yeah, I mean, but you obviously you have to be on a structure now to go work.
Yes. Well, and that's the beauty of having my children are a little older, so this isn't the same thing as having infants and
But
having
you've been
to
through
do
those
that.
years.
Yes, I was definitely.
And you worked through those years.
No, I didn't.
Oh,
See,
okay.
because my children are older. So my eldest is 20.
Okay.
I didn't start. So I started painting in like a professional sense when I think it was 2008.
Okay.
So my youngest was 2.
Okay.
So I guess yes, to some degree I was painting when they were young. But I was painting in the house and I didn't have like a off-site studio or anything like that.
How was that?
Well, it was great because I didn't really know what I was doing and I was learning. And I mean, I have painted my whole life, but I was painting very, I'd see something and I would paint that thing, like, oh, I'm doing a still life or I'm painting a person.
That was my question. So
that's how I taught myself how to paint and I think, when I talk to young children who want to paint, whatever, I say, okay, this is what we're going to paint. And we copy this thing, because that's how you learn. That's how you learn with most subjects is
Right.
to see what came
Emulation.
before you.
Emulation, right.
So, so when I started, it was not that I was copying other people's work, but I was copying in like things in life. It was not as real as I could make it, but as well as I could render it. And the rendering for me was more beautiful when it was slightly off, or really off. And I found myself being really attracted to, I would go to this drawing class at Panza Gallery in Millvale with some really wonderful, talented artists in Pittsburgh. And the way I would draw would be to do blind contour drawings. So you don't look at your paper, you look at the subject, and you just allow your hand to do the work, and you don't pick up your pen. You just one line.
Difficult. That sounds very difficult.
It's not difficult if you just let yourself be free. Okay. And I think that's the thing that I loved about it is just this freedom to just not have any expectations of what it might be and to let that be okay.
I think most people have a hard time with that. I think that's what separates I think that separates the artist segment of society. The ones that do it, and you can honestly say are accomplished artists like yourself, from the rest of us. I think that willingness to let go and self-exploration, I think that society has become so different now and very, we're all being pulled in different directions, even mentally. I think that's to me, looking at it as an outsider, I think that's the differentiation, for the word.
Yeah.
Between an accomplished artist and maybe somebody who is doing it as an aside, but still has the tug and maybe doesn't have the mental freedom. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does. I think that there are a lot of very, very successful artists who are extremely detail-oriented and precision-based. But yes, it is a freedom of, I think at least, of exploration in terms of what you,
That's the word.
Anything that you want to explore. I think that's the distinction between the two, is that I think artists are willing to explore whatever they want to and render that however they want to. And that's interesting to me. I think that there are so many cool voices out there too, in terms of, and when I say voice, like styles and the way people execute their work, I think that is always intriguing to me, how art is such a broad term. But the real artists are the ones that are really exploring whatever moves them, and whatever way that is that moves them, whether it's super technical, whether it's super, liberating in terms of like, I'm not going to worry about the outcome. I'm just going to do the process, whatever it is, I think speaks to the notion that we can be so similar but so different. And there's so many roads yet to travel, which is great. So I think that that's always intriguing to me.
Have you ever found that? Have you ever been in a rut? Have you ever thought like,
yeah.
Okay, let me be more narrow there.
Okay.
You've painted a piece that you're happy with, but then you're painting something else, and there's too much of this prior piece in this piece, and I need. Did you?
Yes, I know what you're saying. So it's like, am I painting the same painting over and over again? Is it too derivative constantly? And like
Generally, yeah.
So I always say to artists, as soon as you're comfortable, change it. So if you start getting comfortable in this idea, and I will say my first series of work that I did that was very successful, and I don't really do so much anymore. I actually started to revisit it recently, but after 7 years, was a series that was fairly representational in so much as you knew it was birch trees, but the background and foreground were abstracted. So there was this, definite relationship to the tangible with this other than thing. And then when I felt like I had vetted that, when I felt like this is just too much of the same thing and I'm just churning these out and I wasn't really, but because there weren't that many when I think about it, but I was like, enough. I have seen this through. This is there's no more inside of me that wants to give to this. And so that's when... And that was a thing
from your childhood, because I read an interview with you about the Birch Project.
Yes. Yeah. So, well, I just... it's funny because this will also be probably revisited down the line when we speak more about certain things. But when one of the first people that kind of moved me in the direction of becoming a professional artist was a sister-in-law of mine. And she was moving into a new office. She's a psychologist. And she showed me an image of a painting that she really liked. And she knew, I had never really done anything like this. I had done art, throughout my entire life, but I hadn't, I've painted with oils as my medium for, since college, but I hadn't really done any sort of real body of work. But she came to me and she said, would you consider doing a piece like this for my new office? And she showed me this painting of sort of an abstracted sky with these birds flying. And I said, no, because another artist already did that. Mm-hmm. And if you want that, you can buy that from that artist. If you want me to do something for you, for your office, I'll try. I'll do something, but it's not going to be that. And she said, okay. So my thought process in doing the first of these birch tree series was, what am I moved by in nature? What can I reflect on other than the ocean, I guess, that kind of resonates with me? And I settled on the birch tree because growing up in Newport, we were side by side with all these houses. And I had this little backyard. And we were the only house on the street that had a birch tree.
Okay.
I had no idea why. Just this weird tree in the backyard that's white and doesn't seem to fit with anything else. Mm-hmm. And yet had this weird, attraction for me, like this uniqueness that separated it out and made it, still weird, but kind of beautiful in that weirdness. And as a child, like I said before, I always felt so awkward and that I didn't fit anywhere.
Really?
Yeah. Yes. And
that does not come through in your adult personality.
That's because I'm secure in myself. That takes a lot of suffering to get where you get.
That's what they say. That's always the excuse they've given to me.
But so it resonated with me because I was like, oh, it sticks out like a sore thumb. Like, it's just really weird there. But there's something really interesting about that weirdness, even though, you're supposed to think weird is wrong or weird. Right. And especially as a child, you think, oh, you don't want to be weird. You don't want to stick out like a sore thumb, or that's not the expression. You don't want to stick out. And, but this tree did, and it still had a beauty about it. So that imagery for me, and that I guess the story behind that for me really resonated. And I thought, that's what I want to paint. So I also came up for, I don't even know how or why, I decided I was going to do the actual texture of the birch before I did anything else.
Okay.
So I didn't, map out the trees or do anything like that. I just did this entire canvas of texture. And then I went and built onto that the background. So the foreground was done before the background was done. It's this whole reverse process. I have no idea why. This is just how I decided to do it. And I came up with this piece and I presented it to my sister-in-law, who, as lovely as she was like, this is awesome. And I'm like, ugh. I was really embarrassed because I was like, I don't know. Is it a piece of crap? I don't know. And it's funny because later in my, like a couple years later, the piece wound up being for sale as a print on an online shop, and it sold out in 20 minutes, the printed.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And so then they called me up and they're like, do you mind if we run more prints? And I was like, run them. I don't know why you capped it.
Into perpetuity,
I don't
yes.
know why you capped it. So that was a really great experience to know that, like, something that really came from me in a personal place was resonated with my sister-in-law, but then with total random people.
Sure.
From there, everything sort of had this like snowball effect with my career. I don't know how a lot of things happened, but they just sort of happened. Well, they didn't just sort of happen. I had a hand in it. So I am not
naturally.
Yeah, right. So I started doing these birch trees, and I think I had painted like 10 paintings. Each one was very different, and I was learning something new about oil painting with each one. And I was learning something new now in when I reflect. I was learning something about my voice in terms of the abstraction too, and the way that I like to paint. So the whole time I was doing the series, I was actually becoming an artist, and I was actively learning and bringing all this information in that would definitely inform all the abstract work that I do today. But I remember one night flipping through an Elle Decor, which is a magazine about homes that I could never possibly live in, but they're beautiful. And I'm flipping through it, and I saw this ad, and we're talking about 2009.
Okay.
For a new type of gallery. And it was an online gallery, which I thought, nobody's going to buy art online. This is so weird. And I'm sure at this point people had been buying art online, but it's also such a, it's such a big leap to say, I'm going to sight unseen purchase something that I only have this, little image of. It's a big leap of faith. So, but I thought, this is kind of interesting. I've now painted 10 things in my life that are like, I should certainly apply because that's what I do.
That's the thing to do.
So I applied, and I didn't think anything more of it. I also applied now a little bit further, and I had a little more. I had like 4 other paintings. I was looking into, so actually a friend of mine told me about the Associated Artists of Pittsburgh, and he said, you should really look into it. You might want to apply to be one of their artists. And I thought, well, I wasn't even calling myself an artist at this point, because it was like, that's such a big word to me. It's so loaded.
You must have came so far, because that timidity that you're talking about now.
Yeah,
that does not come across now.
I've been told
in any capacity. So
well, I sort of was always like this as a child, as this way, like as a small child, and I think it was. When you go through the stages of adolescence and all these things where you just start to feel like, you crawl into a hole.
Sure.
And it took me a while to get out of that hole. But I'm fully emerged.
Yes,
at this point.
I would say so. Can you look back at a year possibly in this, like 2012, 15, 13? Did you actually something in that year?
Clicked.
Or was there a very momentous moment that actually said, wow, you know what? My perceptions changed of myself, or, my confidence levels not went from like a 5 to like a 25. Was there that one moment? Was it reaffirmation from a particular customer possibly?
No, I think it was, when my idea of self-worth transferred from other people's perception of me to how I perceive myself.
I understand that. And
when that switched, and I would say that happened in like 2012-ish.
Okay.
It was liberating, and it was finally like, oh,
It's powerful.
It is. And it's sort of like, okay, not everybody's going to like you. In fact, you know, maybe nobody will like you. But if you like you, then you can do, you know, you can put yourself out there.
So that was your aha moment.
I think that was
in
my
terms of
aha
personal
moment.
growth and professional growth. Probably the same time.
Yeah, you know, maybe it was even before that. I would say my professional growth and my confidence in that started to really, you know, go in a certain trajectory in 2010.
Okay.
And that was after a show that I had, again, at Panza Gallery.
Where is that at, by the way?
That's in Millvale.
Okay.
Mark Panza runs that, and he's just a fantastic person and friend. And he showed my work there in 2010, and that was the first time I showed my abstract work. And that was really a big moment for me, because I think with the trees, you can always say, well, they're trees, right? And so you might not like them, but they're trees.
Yeah.
With the abstract work, it was really like putting myself on display.
That's personal.
And I often have said that being an artist and being, you know, an exhibiting artist sometimes feels like, well, it doesn't sometimes feel like, certainly in the beginning, it doesn't feel like this to me any longer because I've done it so often. But in the beginning, it felt like, okay, go stand in the room naked and let everybody around you pick out your flaws. And you got to stand there and listen to it all.
Right.
It is so difficult and very anxiety producing. But once you
Was that
get
your first
over,
show?
No, my first show. Gosh, well, that might have been my first. No,
The first
it wasn't
abstract show?
No, it was my first abstract show. It was the very first time I showed any abstract work. And
That had to be nerve-wracking.
It was, but of course, I'm such a asshole sometimes. The first abstract piece that I did, like legit, that was in this show was 8 feet by 6 feet. Like
Nice.
I didn't go small.
Yeah, you started large. Yes.
Right. Again, talking about how odd I felt and this tree resonated with me. Well, so I had gone through this entire series thinking that, you know, this birch tree just existed in my backyard, and thinking it was weird, but not knowing why it existed in my backyard. And then I think it was 2011, maybe, I did a charity project for Power, which is a wonderful program that helps women in early stage recovery from drug and alcohol abuse.
It's a national program or Pittsburgh
It's
program?
a Pittsburgh program,
Okay.
and I've been supporting them through art donations for years. And this particular project was Chairs for Charity, and we were to paint on these chairs.
I saw that.
Okay, so I painted a
saw
birch tree,
Yes.
and
Yes.
the chair did very well. It
I saw that.
tied with the top other artists for earning money for the charity, which I made was very gratifying. And then I went to dinner with my parents afterwards, and my dad was like, well, I was telling the story about how, you know, this tree always resonated with me because it's so weird. And my dad was like, well, you know how we got that tree? And I was like, I have no idea. I really honestly thought it just sprang forth from, you know.
Yeah, it's a fallen seed, right?
Yeah. And he said no. When his childhood home was being purchased, he went and snuck in and he dug up a birch tree in its little infancy, and he planted it in our backyard. And so it was this really now took on this other whole dimension of connectivity for me. Like this was something that was special to my father.
Right.
And I thought this really, you know, kind of expanded my appreciation for that work. And as I said before, when I felt I was done with it, when I felt I had really done every incarnation of that I could, that made sense to me, and I put it to bed, that was important for me to realize too, that you can stop doing something even when it's popular and was really selling like hotcakes.
Right.
I could stop doing that to pursue something that was more meaningful at the time. And that was the abstract and the exploration of the abstract. And you could see, if you go back in time to my period there, it really changed. The palette changed entirely too. So it went from these soft blues and yellows and
Funny you said
seafoam
that.
green
Because I noticed that too. Look,
Yeah.
just web doing my homework on the web, but also looking back even at some of your Instagram, your history of Instagram, and you showing little snippets of what you were doing at the time. You can see it.
Yeah, and it comes back in different projects, and I think certainly when I'm doing pieces that are more literal, and I use that very loosely, but like, if I'm doing the pieces that have this ethereal sort of seascapey thing, or this sun setting, sun rising sort of imagery, which is still abstract, I see those colors kind of working their way back in. And it's interesting because I think that all the pieces inform the next one, the next one, the next one. So it's sort of this history.
Build then.
Yeah, I think so.
You feel that your work builds?
I think that just maybe not in each piece, maybe that you don't see that, but like I think the constant education that my work is giving me. Technique, yes, because I've learned a lot of things along the way in terms of technique, but I think it's just a constant, what am I learning next? What am I learning next? And one of the things I really am glad about is that I'm always learning, and that I don't think I've, figured anything out quite yet. And I hope that's always the case, because it keeps everything, exciting.
Fresh.
And exciting for me, exciting for the work, and I see that as being ever present in my practice, which is great. I mean,
So how'd you get to Pittsburgh?
How did I get to Pittsburgh?
You know this coming, right?
So, okay. So this will give you a little back history too. I grew up in Newport, Rhode Island. My parents went to RISD. They moved to Newport in the early 70s. Newport, Rhode Island used to be primarily a Navy town. We have a war college there. There's a Navy presence. And in the early 70s, there were huge cutbacks in the Navy and probably across the board in our defense. And there was this housing crash in Newport. All of the enlisted and younger officers moved out, and all of these houses were available all of a sudden, and they were like selling for peanuts. So my two hippy dippy parents, they were just at the right place at the right time, and were able to get this cute colonial in the heart of Newport, and for $17,000.
Wow.
And so I was very fortunate in that regard, that I grew up in a very beautiful place, and I grew up in with the ocean. It is an island. And so, in so many ways,
I've been there for
that
a jazz festival.
Yes, the jazz festival, the
I've
folk
been there
festival,
multiple times for a jazz festival.
It's a good festival.
It is.
I worked the jazz festival,
and it's not always jazz either.
No.
They bring in very eclectic artists.
That's right. There was, I forget who it was. Was it? Oh gosh, it was Bob Dylan that played the electric guitar for the first time at the. It was at the folk festival though.
Folk festival.
But yeah, so my parents were, as I said, they were kind of hippies, and they tried really hard with their degrees in art to do certain things. And my dad, he had a master's in cartography and landscape architecture. My mother was a school teacher from the get-go. She started in architecture at RISD and graduated with a teaching certificate or teaching undergrad, and went on to have a 45-year career teaching students art. But my father had a little more of a struggle, and in my life I noticed that the first thing, and probably everybody knows, is the first thing that gets cut back is it's arts and music, right? I mean,
always,
in school,
always.
It's always the art department or the music department that gets the cutback. So they struggled with that a lot.
Sports seems to survive.
Yeah, right. But
whole another story.
So, yeah, right. So so that always was happening with my mother's career, but with my father, he wound up just having a couple of bad things happen in a row. And finally, in the early 80s, they had both lost their jobs because of cutbacks. His was with city planning and hers was at the elementary school level.
There was a recession as well, too, in this country then.
So what do my parents do? My dad had always been very, and has always been and will always be for the rest of his life, I'm sure, one of those people that, like, really, if somebody needs a coat, he's going to take the one off his back and give it to him. So he decided they don't have jobs right now. Their kids are pretty young. Let's go do some humanitarian work somewhere. And he connected with the Episcopal Church. We were members of an Episcopal church in Newport, and this elderly woman who had constantly gone on this mission, if you will, but it was really an humanitarian based. She could no longer do this particular mission to Grenada. And so my parents were like, hey, we'll do that. We'll just up and go move to Grenada. So
in the early 80s.
In the early 80s. In 1983. So anybody that knows their history.
Yeah, that's not the most calm place on the planet back then.
Well, it was. It was. We got there and we lived with.
You're being kind.
Yeah. Well, no, we lived with this this family. We didn't live with the family. We lived in a converted bakery off the property of this family, and my dad did work for would do hospice work. He would go to it was right up the street was the hospital. Also right up the street was the military base.
Okay.
Well, about like 3 months into our lovely stay, and I was in school with my brother. We went to this school. So my older brother there was a fancy school on the island. He went to that, but somehow my younger brother and I went to this school that was in the basement of this woman's house, and that was terrifying because every day she would bring in a different size stick, and if you were bad, she would whip your hands. It was like the scariest thing ever. So, but it was fascinating, right? And the life there was awesome, and we really integrated with our community because we were there with them. I mean, I can remember I was 9, and we would jump around on people's roofs to get to somebody's house, and then we would it was just awesome.
They weren't tin, were they? I mean,
yeah, some of them were tin. Yeah, and
rather warm.
We had to wash all our clothes on a
washboard.
What? Yeah. And of course, I was the one who had to do it. My brothers didn't have to do it, but whatever. So, anyway,
bastards.
Yeah, right. So we lived there for a solid 3 months with nothing going wrong,
Wow.
and then all of a sudden,
Wow.
So it was in the fall of 1983 that the Cuban government Cuban government infiltrated the Grenadian military, and there was a military coup.
Yeah.
And I will never forget certain things in my life. This is one I will remember being picked up by my mother from school, and I've never seen my mom scared, and she was terrified. And she was just like, get in the car, we have to go home. And we went home, and I look back now, and it's really sad to me because this is obviously pre-internet,
Sure.
That was the last day I was at that school. That was the last time I was with my friends.
Right.
That was it, And a lot of those kids, I have no idea what happened to them or to their families. But
right.
So we wound up being in the middle of this
coup.
Yeah. And not only that, but we were on the main street, so everything was visible to us.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing that happened was they went in and they arrested the prime minister and 5 cabinet members, and they took them into house arrest, and they took over the military was sort of infiltrated, and I think some of them were rather young and probably brainwashed to some degree as to what was happening. Anyway, so they took the prime minister and these 5 cabinet members under house arrest, and it was weird, and everybody was upset. I remember that. And then one day, the Grenadians decided to get together and go release him. And they thought if they put all the kids in front, nothing would happen. And they were right. The Grenadian military was not going to fire on a bunch of children, school children. So they went in and they freed the prime minister. His name was, oh gosh, now I'm going to forget. But anyway, Bishop and the 5 cabinet members. So they took them out and they proceeded to have this amazing parade throughout the main drag in Grenada, right by our house, right up to the fort where, everything went down. So they're going up the street and they're, it's this big procession, big party. Everything's great and happy. And they go up the street. 30 minutes later, we hear the gunshots. And it was myself and my brothers and the kids of the family that we were kind of staying with. We were up in the attic and we were looking outside and, we saw things we should not have seen.
Right.
But it didn't last long and it was over. And it was like this quiet that overtook the entire island. And for 3 days after that, we were all under house arrest. That got lifted, and my parents were like, we're getting out of here. So they took us to a safe house on the other side of the island. And long story short, I mean, we were hiding on a beach at one point. We had to take a helicopter to a aircraft carrier, then from the aircraft carrier to the landing. Like, it was crazy, but we got out, and we got out with all of our stuff, and we got out safe, and we got out together as a family, and not as many people were as lucky as we were. And there was a lot of suffering, and it was a lot of suffering that I saw at a very young age. And I had to sort of, what's the word I want to say? I had to reconcile that with all of the beautiful things that I had been exposed to prior to that.
Sure.
I had been to Carnival. I'd never seen anything like that. These women were like goddesses, and they had these plumes, and it was all color.
Very colorful area.
It was all color. And going to the market and buying these fruits and vegetables that I'd never seen before. They had these little fruits that were like so delicious. They're called chin-ups. And they were like sour, but also sweet. And they were like amazing.
And so fresh.
Yes. And then they have cashew fruit, which we don't have here because it goes bad before it even gets here.
Can't get it here, yeah.
And it's so good. So all of these different things that were just new and exciting and beautiful, and I was exposed to them in this amazing way because I was living it, were just as impactful as the things, probably even more so than the really ugly, horrible things that I witnessed as well. And so what that did for me, what that experience did for me, and maybe it was my age and maybe it was just the way I internalized everything, it gave me this really deep appreciation for people and for what we go through and the shared humanity of things, and to recognize and to understand one another. And so it became a passion of mine to travel. And we didn't have, when my parents came back, my mother did go back to work as a teacher, and my father took on a position
You went back to Newport.
Yes, as a mailman. So we weren't, swimming in it. But at any chance that I had, whether it was with an organization like the Girl Scouts or with the church or whatever, I would travel. And I did that because, and I would, I've been working since I was 11, which back in the day you could do.
Yes, you could.
Yeah. But, every time I had a little surplus, I would try to go on these trips. And it just made me feel so empowered and so good to be on my own, independent like that, and also with this great desire to learn about where people were coming from. And so that spurned this interest for languages. And I, in high school, also feeling like I did not fit in, I was like, well, I don't fit in here, so why not take off? So in high school, I went abroad for a year, and I did an exchange program in Italy. I didn't speak a word of Italian.
There's worse places to go.
There are worse places to go. There are. Although I lived with a family called the Adams, or that they called the Adams family. So I don't know.
In Italy, the Adams family?
They called the people in the area called them the Adams family. They were a little off. But
Just a tad.
Just a tad. But I did move to another family because it was too much for me. But anyway, I lived there for a year, and I didn't speak a word of Italian. When I left, I was fairly fluent, not, crazy fluent, but I could hold my own. And
which is sometimes even more dangerous than not knowing the language.
Yeah, true. But it gave me such a tremendous appreciation for language as well. So now I've decided as a young person that I really want to meet as many people as I can and find out their stories and see the world this way. But I also want to be able to communicate with them. And so as a freshman, I can remember, as a freshman in high school, I remember going to, so this is backtrack a little bit because that was junior year. But as a freshman, I went to visit colleges with my older brother. And he went to Georgetown to visit. And I remember stepping on that campus and thinking, this is where I need to be. I don't know why.
You just knew it.
I just knew it.
Right.
And they had a school for languages and linguistics. So by the time I was a junior, I already knew that's where I wanted to go. And I needed to somehow get there. I didn't know how, but I was going to get there. So I came back from that year abroad, and what I decided to do was repeat my high school junior year so that I would be in a better position academically to go and pursue this dream of going to Georgetown. It's
a rather mature decision for someone that age.
I was very determined. I'm a fairly determined person.
That I will not argue as we sit here today. There's no timidity with you.
Yeah.
But that I get. But I mean, for that age, I mean, was 16 years old? I was pretty, or maybe 15 for a junior in high school, right? I mean, that was pretty insightful. Yeah,
I knew what I wanted, and I knew I wanted to go there. Why? I don't know. But and actually, in retrospect, it was not the right school for me. But at the time, I thought this is the bee's knees. Anyway, so I
haven't heard that in a while.
Yeah. I like to use antiquated little
sayings.
That's cool,
though. I call things hip and groovy, and you dig this, and I dig that. That's
I'll bust out the cat's meow at some point.
Right. Oh, that's coming. That's coming. I'm sure.
Anyway, so I did wind up going to Georgetown, and I studied languages, and I went another year abroad to Italy my junior year of college, and I met this guy sophomore year who was from Pittsburgh, who I thought was, pretty great, I guess. And anyway,
that's how stories start.
Very long-winded way of answering your question.
We have all night.
And I do remember the question. It was, how did you get to Pittsburgh?
Yeah, we're on our way.
So that's how I got to Pittsburgh, was meeting my at the time, what I didn't know was my future ex-husband in Georgetown. So,
okay.
And he was a Pittsburgher, and we all know what Pittsburghers like to do. They like to go back home.
They go home.
Yeah. So, so here I am.
It's almost a disease.
it's really, it's not unique to Pittsburgh. I think in communities that are really, bound by this
ethnicity.
Well, no, it's really bound by like this sense
culture.
Of. Yeah, but it's this culture of being from Pittsburgh. It's just interesting to me. It's almost like it's defined itself as its own little country within a country.
Did you say that Pittsburghers have a lot of pride?
Yeah, and they really appreciate one another, and I think that there's a lot of good things in that. I mean, it's weird, but it's...
When I traveled all the years, I don't do it much anymore, but all the years I was in business, that crazy music business, I would travel, and I would love it no matter where I went. I mean, I could go to northern Alabama and just some place where there's no one around. I love it. I go to Kansas, Nebraska. I go to L.A. I go to Seattle. I go to New York. Every time I come home, I'm like, I can't believe I'm flipping coming home. The sky's gray.
Right.
But there was just something. I mean, my kids were here. I get that.
Yeah.
But I was probably always amazed why the draw to come back, because I'd fly in and the sky would be gray.
It's not the weather.
It wasn't the permane sandwiches for me, because I don't dig the coleslaw on the fries. I just don't do it.
It's the people.
It is. I would believe there's a lot of truth to that.
Mm-hmm. And I think in the art community, I would say this is probably one of the perks of being and working in Pittsburgh for me. It's such a warm, supportive, good community of people who
Friendly,
work in the arts.
would you say?
Yeah, everybody, if it's not the competition that it is in other places, I feel like
New York?
we all sort of have our own thing going on, and if a project isn't for me, well, maybe it's for somebody else.
Sure.
And I'm happy to give that name. To your comment earlier, like, no, I don't paint dogs, but I know somebody who does, and I'll pass that name on, so there's I think a great sense of like we're all in this together, and we're just sort of figuring out how we want to be as an art community right now, because it's somewhat fledgling. Not really. I mean, we've had a long and storied history of great artists coming through Pittsburgh and being in Pittsburgh. But I think that there may have been a lull to some degree for some time, and now there's a resurgence. And
That's
to
good to
be
hear.
on the precipice of that is quite wonderful. And I love the people that I work with constantly, meeting more, and really I think we all look out for one another. It's great. So while it took me a little bit, I will admit, it took me 7 years to admit to myself that I was living in Pittsburgh. Now, that might be insulting.
That's very honest.
But
No, it's not insulting.
It was
You came
just
from
a really
Newport.
hard process for me because
What big differences you found between Newport and Pittsburgh? What was
it was
what
the
were
ocean. It was the lack of ocean.
Okay.
And
I see
so
that.
it was not being, and maybe the vitamin D, but like, it was.
I take a supplement because I live in Pittsburgh.
Right.
Yes.
But it was the lack, and while the rivers are great.
Are they?
The ocean
I'm
was a really
kidding.
difficult thing for me to not
Sure,
be near. And
sure.
so that was, 7 years. It's not so bad. I've been here for 20 now. And I
Do
will
you
say
feel like a Pittsburgher?
I feel at home here. But I also feel at home in Newport. So I feel
That's
like
good,
I
though.
have two
That's good.
homes.
That's
yeah.
good.
And I have, and all of my children were born here, and they are,
They're Pittsburghers.
they're Pittsburghers, and they also feel like they're at home in Rhode Island too. So that's good. We kind of like are balanced in that way. But so that's what brought me to Pittsburgh, to finish that long-winded explanation.
That's good to know, and it's so 20 years in Pittsburgh, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm sure you've acquired your tastes in this town on many fronts. What do you love about this town?
I really, for me, it's been the people. Very supportive communities, in various communities, whether it's where I live or the artist community, patron community, even the corporate community in terms of their support of the arts. I think that it is really a unique place to live. Recently, I would say, I've also really enjoyed this wave of new creativity, culinarily speaking, and because I'm a foodie.
I did not know that. We need to explore that.
And I love my food.
Well, it's amazing to me, though, it's amazing to me, and maybe 10 years is too broad, the last 6-7 years, the amount of restaurants that are opening up.
And good ones.
Yeah.
Really good ones.
Almost
so,
like,
yeah.
I lack for a word, so I'm going to say almost like boutique restaurants.
Well, so I would say that they're like farm to table ones, and that was like a
That's
trend.
boutique to me.
Yes, they're boutique. That was sort of a trend. So the locavore trend, right? Where
Whoa, back up. What's that?
yeah, so locavore is like
Educate my Neanderthal mind there. Go ahead.
It's when you source your food or whatever
Locally,
and you consume it locally.
Immediately,
Locavore.
almost. Right.
So-
okay. See, well, take me to school tonight.
There you go. So that started with the chefs that came and are working
Right.
here, and some fabulous chefs. I mean, really, we're just lucky to have even what we have now compared to what we had like 10 years ago.
Give me some spots. Where do
I like
what
to
do you
eat?
dig? Where do you like to eat at?
Well, okay. I'm very partial to Superior Motors, and it's not because every single piece in there is mine.
Yeah, pretty much the entire place you walk. I've been there.
No, but I really love it. I really love it. And and I loved Salt before that, and I didn't have a single piece there, and it's the same chef, so there. I loved Cure until they closed, but I get that there's a new dawn there for them, and that they're going to be pursuing more of their charcuterie business, which is wonderful because I love charcuterie.
Okay.
I am a meat eater. And
yes, my carnivore.
Yeah. And
I
Morcia.
respect my vegetarian friends.
Yes, I do too. And
always.
I respect
and probably
everybody.
admire them for their discipline.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Because I don't have that sort of discipline.
Me neither.
So Morcia would be, Justin's other, Severina's other location, which is excellent.
Right.
I just tried out Fish Nor Fowl. I love that the chefs are using such different and interesting things on their menu that I wouldn't, I think as a younger person, have tried out. But now I'm like, what? Crispy pig face? I'm all over it. I'm trying that out.
I'm not touching that one.
That was on the Superior menu for a bit.
I'm not surprised.
And then, tongue was on the Fish Nor Fowl.
I've had that.
And
afterwards, I found out what I was sampling. Yes.
I love it though. I love it's just like, wake me up a little bit. I'm not interested in chicken nuggets and mac and cheese.
Understood.
Like I love the fact
after
that
raising 4, I'm probably guessing you want to move on from that, right?
Well, and it's also like, for me, I noticed there's a lot of crossover with visual art and food. And
really?
I just think that there's like this appreciation, and I don't know.
So
in
you're
my
really
life,
in the presentation, then
I think there might be some of that, and the sort of the artistry that goes into that, and the artistry that goes into creating these meals that are just there. I feel maybe as if you could like eat paint in a painting, like maybe that's what's happening with some of these concoctions.
Well, I mean, it's appealing to your palate.
It's wonderful.
But it has to look beautiful, right?
Yeah. It does. It should look beautiful.
Right,
yes.
right.
And all of the places that I've mentioned are, there's others, there's Scratch and Troy Hill that is just excellent. And so many downtown now that didn't previously, exist, which is interesting to me because downtown has really developed it's like night and day. When I first moved here, it was a ghost town, and now it's vibrant. It's
it's safe too.
It's safe. It's vibrant, and
that was always
it's a
fear.
It's a destination,
exactly right.
and it wasn't before.
Exactly right. Well, kind of like Lawrenceville, right?
Absolutely right. And look at all of the great things in Lawrenceville. Like, Umami. I was just there the other night. Great food, great atmosphere. Even some of the older businesses that have been around a little, like Piccolo Forno's, great food. It's been there and I think they were maybe were the first wave on the first wave of that transition from mediocrity to where we are now. I think in the scene, and it's small, but we're small. Pittsburgh's small, and I say that a lot because like it means something.
The charm of it.
Yeah, and it also means that like people are generally speaking really respectful of people that are doing something different and people that are putting themselves out there because it's visible. You can lose yourself in a place like New York. You can be unique and different, but nobody's paying attention to you. Here, that's a great phrase. Here, repeat that for me. You can be unique and different in New York, but nobody's paying attention to you. Here, that stands out. That is unique and different, and people want to know what that's about. Excellent. So I really appreciate that element to what's happening too. But yeah, so that's what I love about
pulling
Pittsburgh.
Towards your Italian roots. Have you? And again, this is a shameless plug for a great.
Oh, by the way, Dish is reopening.
I heard that.
Oh my gosh, and that was one of my favorite restaurants, and they were around for a really long time, and we're always doing great things. So yes,
different management there, right?
It's the Savoia family, I believe.
Really?
Yep.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yep.
Have you been to Vivo in Sewickley?
I don't. Yeah, Sewickley's far.
Oh, Well,
I have not.
I will tell you this: the Sam DiBattista and his lovely wife Lori own it. Phenomenal place. But I actually...
There was an eye roll there, just so everybody knows. They went back in your head when you said phenomenal place. It must be really good.
Oh my God, yes. It's nondescript. It's just...
I will have to go. I love the nondescript places. They're the like what you think is just a little hovel or a house or whatever. You're like,
we will talk about Vivo.
Yeah.
But Sam, and there's so many great chefs in Pittsburgh.
Oh, so many,
And that's... The food aspect of will be part of this show as well as we move forward too. So I probably can use your help in that regard.
Oh, I would love to.
But Vivo Kitchen, there you go. Sam, I love you. I mean, and it's, you know.
I will come, Sam. I will come visit, and I will.
Oh my gosh.
I'll probably plug you the next time I'm on.
Meatballs to die for. Yes. I have this side order meatballs, probably 2, you know, a couple of cocktails, and I'm done.
Yeah.
But everything's great there. So. You've
also should say the galley group, by the way, where they try out the other the chefs. I should mention them as well, because I think that's a great concept, and I think that allows so many possibilities, and it's been wonderful too. But keep going.
No, absolutely.
They're just like they keep popping into my head.
Sam DiBattista Vivo is involved with so many. How do I say this? He's always sharing ideas with so many of the top,
and they do.
He is just something else. So, but you consider yourself a Pittsburgher, right? 20 years now.
Yeah.
Right. Good. This is a good transition. I mean, we talked at length during our visit, which was I thought was very interesting to me, was that there is that business component of what you do.
Oh yeah,
and we're going to get into that.
All right.
We will, and I want you to feel completely unencumbered, and I want you to really vet it out with me.
Okay.
And to the degree that you're comfortable.
Yeah.
But you know, that's got to be a fine line. That's going to be a fine line to some degree. I mean, if your integrity is intact and you believe what you're doing and you believe it comes from the heart, and that's a good representation of who you are, then the money part of it should just be an ancillary part of keeping you in business and enabling you to keep doing that.
Sure.
But I think there's a lot of, and again, my optics are different because I come from a different industry. But I think oftentimes it's, I don't know. I think there's a harsh view. I think jealousy, envy, the part of the human condition where people want to question someone's art, question someone's skill set, question someone's vision, and they want to criticize that is out there. And I think when you put a money component on it, in terms of the broad public, especially in this social media life we live in, and this instant gratification life we live in, I think sometimes it gets skewed.
I think that is more conditioning rather than actuality, because I think that there's this idea that artists don't value what they do because they don't place monetary value on that.
How did that happen, though?
Well, I just think that is put upon us as if you attach a monetary value to something, then you don't have artistic integrity, and they are not mutually exclusive things. I think that it's been very interesting to me, because as an artist and also as a primary supporter of my family, I have to view what I do in a very deliberate way, and so that I can keep doing what I do as a profession and bring in enough to support my family. So there is consideration on many points, and I think I've learned a lot in considering those things, and I think hopefully I will pass on some of the things I've learned to other people, other artists, certainly in the field I'm in. I can't speak to all the other artistic fields. This is really just specific to visual arts,
as it should be.
But so I do, and I think I have always viewed it as I am a small business. I am the smallest business. I am the business of one person. And what I do and what I produce is going to be, what sustains me. And how do I do that to the degree that in 10 years I'm still doing what I need to sustain this? I think that part of the arts education that's missing is this business element. And I know that it's one of those things that's a little touchy because people don't want to, sully their idea of what art means with business, but I think that's ridiculous. And I think that's been proven to be ridiculous. It's just that we just don't address it as much.
It's not just starving artist then.
Well,
if
okay.
If it's not addressed, right?
Yeah, I mean, the notion of the starving artist is sort of self-perpetuated, but and I will address that also. But
are you ready to get into it? Let's get into it.
Let's get into it. So I really think that there is a lot to be learned in terms of how the artist community values itself, and then how the general consumer community values art. And I guess the patrons or the would-be patrons, right? And I think Pittsburgh is very difficult because I think, there's so many good things about being an artist in Pittsburgh in terms of like, I can, get a amazing studio. I have 2,200 square feet. There's not a chance in hell I would have that in New York. But in New York, they don't balk at the pricing. They value it. They understand where art stands in their life. They see what that does. Here, it's a little bit harder. I don't want to generalize because it's certainly not something you can generalize, but I think that it's still being educated. It's still a community being educated in what value means in terms of art and what that means. And one of my major drives as an advocate, if you will, and this is not something that I wanted to do. I didn't think I would ever be like a voice for anybody other than myself. But like, as a advocate for artists in Pittsburgh, making a livable wage is really something that I am focused on, and something that I think that artists need to focus on themselves. I'm sure a lot of them are, because everybody wants to make a livable wage. But how do we do that? Because there aren't industry standards, if you will. It's sort of like the Wild West, and everybody's so individual. Now, we're kind of coming to a point, I believe, where there is some streamlined things, and there is some cohesion, and there is talk amongst ourselves, and there is this sense of, okay, we're now in this together, which is great, because that's the way that we can affect change. But there are so many things. I mean, it really is on the very, very, very early stages of understanding what it means for an artist to be sustainable, and what that means to a community, and why a community should care that your artist population is self-sustainable. Because a lot of people are like, well, what do I care? Well, if your other professions went under in some way, you would probably care.
Without question.
And so I think the first thing is like, what does an artist bring to a culture, an environment? And I think that we always think, oh, well, duh. But it's not, well, duh, because if it were well, duh, then we'd have more practicing artists.
Right.
And we'd have more artists that have sustainable, studio practices that don't have to take on, second and third jobs, which is currently the majority of people. So it's not a well, duh. And I'd like it to be. I don't see that happening in my lifetime, but let's do what we can to get there, And so
why not? Why don't you see that happening? What are some of the challenges?
So many challenges. It's not just coming from the community that maybe doesn't necessarily value art the way it ought to be valued, but it's also like the artists themselves that don't know how to value. There are a lot of factors, right? So
is there a self-esteem issue with some of these artists?
No, it's not. I think it's, again, going back to like industry standards and the fact that there really aren't any.
Should there be?
Good question. I have often thought, should the market just bear itself out and, let the good artists And that's such a subjective. I mean, what do you even
But
like? That should be in.
But the market will determine that, right? The public.
Well,
will
does
determine
the market? I mean, then you have the
I don't know.
then
I'm
you have the
asking.
question mark of well, does the market determine good art? Sometimes not. You know, sometimes that art that should be recognized and be seen is not necessarily commercial. So there's a lot of factors in play here, but I guess what I focus on, because I can't really attack all of the different things, that would be ridiculous, and it's such a broad subject.
Right.
I try to focus on practicing artists that are supporting themselves and their families through their studio practice. That's my main directive. And that could be very commercial artists, from like, I'm doing a portrait of a dog, to I'm doing, this piece that means nothing to, like, is completely abstract or experimental, but that they are sustaining their lives on their studio practice. So I think that's I've kind of narrowed it down to that being my focus. That said, like, there's still so much that we have to talk about in that narrow view of what's happening in art. Like, I'm not focusing on museum artists or curation, because that's a different, I think, different subject entirely. It might even be like a different way to discuss art.
Okay.
But this is about, how do you sustain yourself? How do you protect yourself? How do you run your business? Yes. And the business of art in a way that's that provides you an opportunity, not just to make a livable wage, but hey, quite frankly, to excel in your profession.
And grow your practice.
And grow it, and maybe even, set some money aside for retirement. These are things that people don't even think about. So I have really focused on that. And I've been lucky in many ways to have a reason to have a platform to talk about it. But I've also encountered things in my own career that have informed me, maybe negatively, maybe positively, and I've been able to pass that information on to other people. And so I know we spoke about this in my studio, but the most recent thing is to talk about how an artist protects their work from copyright infringement.
Plagiarism.
Yeah.
I can say it.
I know, you can say it.
And I'll say it for you.
Yeah. So this is an interesting thing that's happened recently for me, and very informative. And I'm not happy it happened, but I'm happy to inform other artists as to maybe how to avoid something like this happening, or quite frankly, inform businesses and would-be thieves, if you will, from doing what this particular
that's what it is.
Right, from doing what this particular business did to my practice. So I'm going to backtrack a little bit.
Yep.
Last year, it's almost been a year, by the way.
I can't believe that.
Mm-hmm. So actually, it's been a year. Last April.
It's over a year.
Yeah. So last April, I had a business come to me, and an establishment come to me and say, hey, we really like your work. They were very specific about where they liked my work, so they had seen my work. Very specific about what they liked about my work. Mm-hmm. And they said, hey, we're opening this new establishment. Would you come and talk to us about maybe doing something? It wasn't a definite, but maybe coming and doing something for us.
So they were going to commission. For those who don't know what commission means, they're basically hiring you to create a piece of art for them.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And it felt very legitimate to me.
Initially.
Right. So I want to also say this, like, when you're figuring out your pricing for art, you have to figure in a lot of things. I mean, this is, again, if you're talking in terms of business, you have to figure out things like overhead and materials and time. But what people don't think about is oftentimes we're asked to do this consulting that we do not get paid for.
No. up front.
Right. So I'm going in and I'm consulting these people. It takes me 15, 20 minutes to get there and back. I'm there for an hour and a half. That's 2 hours. That's 2 hours of my workday.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm going without payment. So all of that has to be figured into your work as well. I go there. I spend the time. I map out the size. I talk to there are 3 proprietors. I talk to the one, and finally the discussion rolls around to the point where I feel comfortable to say, let's talk about pricing. I mean, maybe I should have attacked that from the beginning. I don't know, but it's irrelevant because it would have had the same consequence.
Yeah, it's not a good lead-in for any business.
Right. You have to be a little savvy. So anyway, it comes around to that point. I give my pricing, and I see this sort of face drop, and I thought, okay. So
is that a recurring theme with art in general?
No, I just think that I've seen that enough, and I've never seen it in New York. My prices, if I give them out in New York, it's not even a question mark. Here,
probably too low.
Here it's like it's sometimes a struggle. And that goes back to value, right? And how we perceive that value. But anyway, so I give my price and I get this look that I'm like, okay, this is not what he was anticipating.
Okay. So
I finally say, all right, what was your budget? And I had given alternatives to like lowering that to some degree. And he gave me his price, and it was like a 1/6, maybe even an 1/8 of what my pricing would be for this work.
Yeah.
So I just, there were some more things that occurred, but like I finally left, and I went thinking, okay, fine. I lose jobs. It's what we win some, we lose some.
Business.
It is business. So I went on my merry way, and I came back in June. So this was August. I came back in June with an email like, just checking in. Did you want to do these alternative things that I had mentioned doing in our previous talk? And he was like, no, we went our own way, but we might work with you in the future. So, thanks. Right. So, okay. I didn't think anything of it.
You didn't?
Nope. Come
okay.
August, I get a message from a patron and friend who has snapped this picture, sends it to me, and says, "Me a copycat?" And I knew that wall because I had measured out that wall. And I knew that what I was looking at was somebody trying to do my work. Now, I say that because that's my initial gut response. My second thought was, you know what? Maybe they got this from another person, from another state, from another place. And I say that because I also know exactly what's being produced here because
Sure.
I've seen it.
Sure.
And I sit on the board of the Associated Artists, which oversees like 600 members, and I know what's out
You need
there.
to restate that.
Yeah. So it's like, okay, I know it's not somebody that is very similar to me who's just producing work here. So it's like, all right. This patron of mine that sent this actually did find out as well that the person was a employee of the establishment who made this work. And so that even further,
Antennas are up now.
Yeah, well, the antennas are like ding, ding, ding. They're exploding. Yes.
Right.
So now I know this is a copy. So my instinct was to go to speak to the director of the Associated Artists of Pittsburgh, Madeline Gent, and I said, this is what's happening. Tell me if I'm crazy. And she's said, no, this is like anybody looking at this would say.
Plagiarism.
Yeah. Exactly. Which is interesting to me because we had this discussion. Yes. Because we had this discussion and everybody seems to understand what plagiarism is. Like that's a no-brainer. Like you get kicked out of college, you get kicked out of not kicked out of high school, but you get severely, reprimanded and whatnot.
Financially punished.
Yes. For plagiarism, people have lost their jobs at like very, significant
They've
journalistic.
lost their assets.
Yeah, right. And yet, somehow, in the visual context, that's not like as understood, which is shocking to me, because to me, when you copy someone, similar to the fact that when my sister-in-law back in the day said, can you do this painting? And I said no, because somebody else had already done that painting. That would have been a copy for me to do it. Even if it were hanging in her office, which nobody would know anything better, like they would just have seen it and that was that. There's something to be said about integrity and not doing something that isn't yours. So I went to the Associated Artists and I asked about help, and there happens to be a very wonderful, what do you call it? It's a board member, but it's a advisory board member, and his name is Barry Friedman, and he is a copyright attorney. So he offered to help and write me a letter. And we wrote a letter, and it went to these proprietors. They read it. They sent back another letter. I should tell you that all 3 of the proprietors are lawyers. And they came back with another letter.
Of course.
Yeah, saying basically, screw off. So, but at the end of it, they were like, no, this isn't a copy. This is organically this other person's thing. And by the way, they're even entitled to their own copyright on this. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. And,
and that's a little.
Yeah. And then at the end of it, they said, but, okay, we don't want anybody to be unhappy. So let's go. Let's talk about it. Come in and we'll talk about it. So Barry and I go and we meet beforehand, and I say to Barry, and Barry's like, Mia, I don't know anything about abstract art. Can you walk me through this? He's like, I get the visuals. They're like, he's like, there is substantial similarity. He's like, but walk me through your piece so I understand what you did as an artist. And so I walked him through the piece, and the piece was actually called 1983. It is hanging in Superior Motors. It is based on my experience in Grenada. So there is a lot of emotion in that piece for me. There's a lot of beautiful, beautiful colors, but if you look at it, embedded underneath everything is 1983 throughout. And then there's also this section of darkness. And I like to think in life that I focus on the color and the beauty and the things that are, happening that are uplifting rather than the darkness. But there is definitely in life, as in I hope in my art, a balance between the two, because you can't have the one without the other.
Right.
So that's that piece. And so I explained all this to Barry, and he was very appreciative of the explanation. And I said, now, what do you want me to do in this meeting? And I'm clearly a talker, as I have said. And he said, I want you to not speak. And I thought, that's going to be really hard, but I'm going to do it. So we went into the meeting and I did not speak. I chuckled one time, and that was because the one of the proprietors said something that was rather demeaning, I thought, and I chuckled. And then I got scolded, which was lovely. But anyway,
by
the person saying the thing that was rather demeaning, but that's okay. So
no, it's not.
No, it's not okay, obviously. So we were asked to examine the work, and I was told multiple times that didn't resemble my work at all, and this was So
you show me the work. I've seen the work,
Yeah.
and friends, it's a copy.
Mm-hmm.
I can't put it any other ways. I'm a novice. I looked at it. That looks like a copy of your work.
Yeah. Barry, prior to going into this, was like, okay, we also need to come up with like an idea of what you would like to do. Like, what would you like out of this? And I've always said, I want it to come down. I want it off the wall.
Right.
No other stipulations. I just want it off the wall. I want it off. Oh, by the way, too, this is the other caveat. They used it as branding. So they used it as their backdrop to their Facebook. They used it as the backdrop to their Instagram. They used it as the backdrop to their marketing in what they were showing. And what I'd like to say to younger artists is, and this is definitely a sidebar, but so important, inherent in everything that you do is your copyright. When you sell a work, you're not selling the copyright unless there's some agreement that you're selling some sort of licensing or some sort of, or the copyright itself, which would be a whole nother price point.
Right.
You're not selling that. So you might buy my work, Eric, and put it in your house. But if you make a card out of it for Christmas,
It's copyright infringement.
I could sue you.
Certainly.
I can make a card out of it. I could make a card out of it,
Sure,
but you can't.
You own it. Right.
So
That's pretty common sense to me, though.
a lot of artists don't know this, and
No,
obviously,
as a consumer, I kind of get that.
yeah, no, a lot of consumers think, well, I bought it, so I own it, right? Well, because you've been in the arts, you've been in music. Music has a similar
you buy the
sort
album,
of right.
You have the right to play that album.
But
you start distributing that album and making a profit out of it, heaven forsake, that's not permitted.
Correct, but you know that because you've been in the field that you've been in.
My card's been plagiarized.
I would suggest, yeah.
Trust me. In China.
Oh yeah, easily.
I couldn't fight it. Yeah, couldn't fight it.
You have G. Clay, you have prints being made of people. All you have to do is extract images off the internet and print it on a freaking canvas, and you're done, right? This happens all the time. That's another thing that happened this year that I could talk about. But
people getting G. Clays out of your
G. Clays out of your,
that's
not out of my work, but I will talk about that.
We'll
but anyway, with this sidebar is what I want to say is. Be aware that if somebody purchases your work, they're not allowed to do anything with it except exhibit it, whether it's in their home or their office or their business. It doesn't matter.
Reproduce it.
They cannot reproduce it unless you given them license
Explicit
to do so.
Permission.
To do so,
right.
and they've paid you to do so. So even though this artist copied my work, they were also slighted by the fact that they weren't paid for the marketing that went on with this work. So, it's so many things are wrong with what they did.
Sure.
So many things are wrong with what they did.
Right.
So, at any rate, moving forward, I wind up, long story short, we have this interaction with the people, with Barry and myself. And at the end of it, they finally said, well, we're not taking it down because we love it. And I will say, they started the entire argument with, you would be so offended if somebody told you this looked like your work. I mean, it's not nearly the quality or whatever. And then at the end of it, they're like, we love it. And we're not taking it down. So you have two choices. Oh, and also, by the way, in the middle of it, they were like, do we really want to pursue a $100,000 litigation? Because, by the way, with these suits, you can only take it to federal court because it's a copyright situation.
Right.
And they do run about $100,000. And what artist is going to go and pursue a $100,000 litigation for
a threat?
Yes. So then at the end of it, they said, well, we love it. We're not taking it down. So you have two choices. Name a price, like we'll buy you off for some price. Well, I'm figuring it's not going to be anything anyway, but I'm not taking a price. Yeah,
artist for that.
And then second was, or we can put up a plaque next to it that
inspired by
Tarducci. That gives the name of the actual artist, so there can be no misattribution. And I sat there and I thought, by virtue of the fact that you're saying there might be misattribution, aren't you admitting that it looks so much like my work that there might be misattribution?
Sounds like it to me.
What the hell is happening right now? Right. So we step outside, and my lawyer says, think of a price. Like, think of something that might help you to walk away. Because he already knew my head was on fire about the attribution thing. And I said, you know what? There is no price. And he knew that too. But he just wanted me to calm down because it was really offensive what they were saying.
Sure.
And he said, just take the weekend and whatever. So I don't take the weekend. I wind up talking to a few people. I wind up getting pro bono representation from Cozen O'Connor. And in particular, 2 intellectual property attorneys from Park Avenue in New York. And these women are, well, first of all, they're Italian. So
It's New York.
The one is, yeah, Amy DeVino and Lisa Ferrari, and they're just amazing. And they said, Mia, all we had to do is look at these two things, and that's it. Plus, you have the story behind it. Plus, you have the documentation behind it. This is a slam dunk.
Email trails.
Total slam dunk.
Right.
So, fast forward, we're a year later, and it's still on this.
Not resolved.
It's still unresolved. Number one, because I've given them so much time for the benefit of the doubt that they're going to take it down and do the right thing. I've offered them so many opportunities to do that, and opportunities to actually get in front of it and to be actually heroes, if you will.
Right,
because one of the things I
get that.
One of the things that I have found out was, yes, while it's inherent in the work that your copyright exists, unless you register the copyright, you can't take it to federal court. You can't take it to court. And you can do that retroactively prior to going to court. You can register it post even, filing, but it has to be in the system. So what I didn't know was that, and what I didn't know was it's $55 a pop every time you do it. So if you think about registering every piece of work, that can become a really expensive thing. So my initial thing was to say, okay, artists, register the pivotal pieces that you have that then you have derivative work from. So like your main, flagship piece for each series, if you will. And I thought, this is okay. I can do this myself. But there are a lot of artists that $55 is just, they're going to put that to the rent. They're putting that to their rent. Right. So I decided if I was going to take this to court and if there were going to be any sort of monetary anything in response in terms of a settlement, I would put a chunk of it towards a fund to help artists either subsidize that cost or pay in full so that other artists can register their copyright. Sure. So I was talking to a friend who runs a foundation, and he said, Mia, if you start that fund, I'm earmarking right now $5,000 to it. And I said, guess what? I just started the fund.
Okay.
It's okay.
Absolutely.
So I brought it to them through my lawyer that, listen, take the work down, give it to me. And the reason why I say give it to me is because if it's not handed over to me, I cannot guarantee that the work is not going to be profited upon in some other way.
Absolutely.
Whether it's sold or it comes back out and out of, retirement at some point, whatever. It needs to be handed to me because it's a copy of what I do. So that's one stipulation. Then I said, and then contribute something towards this fund. I asked, for the for the 5,000 matching, and you're going to come out smelling like roses. I mean, I will be the forefront of this, saying how wonderful this is, that we all learned something. Win-win. It was a learning moment. Look how we've all grown and learned from this. Well, no. So where we are now is there will be no admission of guilt, period. They won't do it. They don't want to admit, for whatever reason. They would like to take this down, according to them, but they will only do so if I will not speak one word about the situation. And my position on that is, first you steal my work, and then you try to steal my voice.
They gag you.
And I'm not going to be okay with that ever. So I'm not going to sign anything other than I won't speak your names and I won't speak about the location. I think that's fair. And they're, not contributing to any sort of artist fund, that's for sure. So that's sort of where we are. They have one position and I have the other, and we'll see in the next month how that shakes out. But, it's been a very long time that it's been up. It's degrading of what I do.
Right.
So I was talking to these younger artists about all of this, and, about value and how do you value and how do you say, okay, well, I'm worth this much. And to put it in perspective for them, I took the profession of a lawyer in context to this. And I said, here's a lawyer. They went through a certain amount of schooling, right? They graduated from prestigious schools or not prestigious schools, whatever. They still have the same degree. It's still a law degree. JD. They passed the same freaking bar, right? How do they come to their per hour pricing? I'll tell you. They think of a lot of things. They think about what firm they're with, or maybe what practice, maybe they're on their own. They think about their overhead. They think about their schooling. They think about the type of law. They think about how well they've done with it. They think about their notoriety. They think about
their own personal worth.
Their own personal worth, right? But it's arbitrary. That hourly number is still based on things that are not concrete. It's the same thing for an artist. Like, you have to think about your overhead, your experience, your schooling, all of these factors that come into play. It's the same thing. And when you boil down what what it would have cost this establishment to purchase my work, it would have accounted for less than 1 week of one person's billable hours if you're even a mediocre lawyer.
So it's principle on there. It's all principle and their stubbornness.
Well,
and a lot of other adjectives.
I'm just like, well, and so I said to this class of kids, I said, well, so what makes this profession valued this way and ours not?
Right.
So that's what needs to change. When I talk about like things that, are things that I focus on that I think are changeable within maybe my lifetime, we'll see, I don't know, but like it's the how we value ourselves and our professions that like really from the internal perspective has to change, and then I think will then change the external. I have never encountered a lawyer, and I don't know about you, that has ever questioned their value.
No.
I hate to
and
say
I've paid
it,
plenty,
but
trust
I
me.
haven't. Yeah, I have paid plenty as well. It's just this sort of like confidence in their value. And I'm not disparaging that.
No.
That's great.
No.
I'm so glad you're so confident in your value, but that should apply to my profession as well. We should be able to say, I'm very confident in my value. Mm-hmm. The other thing too, which I find fascinating, if I don't produce, I don't get paid. Mm-hmm. These people who are confident in their value yet don't produce the outcome that they convinced you they're going to produce in the beginning still get paid.
Yeah. Oh, you're right.
It's fascinating to me.
Oh, absolutely.
Fascinating
the
to me.
The dynamic of the two. Absolutely.
Yeah. So fascinating. I'm still getting a bill. You didn't produce anything that you said you were going to produce.
What's that? Like every 10 minutes of telephone consultation is like, yeah.
So that to me is really interesting. And I think, again, maybe it's a confidence thing. Maybe it comes down to like, I suppose when you're a younger person and you're starting your art career, you feel as though you're not worthy. But I submit to you that if you've gone through this process and you're creating something, you're worthy.
Oh, no question.
You're worthy.
No question.
And you need to start looking at it from the get-go that way.
But it's basically now business lessons being given to art students, and probably that's unusual, wouldn't you think?
Well, I think it's very unusual and sadly unusual. I think that it's absolutely, it's fundamental. And I keep going back and say this to so many people as, if you don't value yourself and you don't look at yourself as a small business and look at the things that you need to be considering, in 10 years, you will not be an artist.
Right. It'll be a hobby in your basement.
You can't afford to be.
Right.
So if you really want to do this, then you need to consider these things. Mm-hmm. Now, again, I go back to the idea that like I'm speaking specifically to a certain genre of artists that are maybe more commercial than, say, a museum type artist that is doing work that is driven by grants and other money.
Sure.
important work that I think is,
absolutely.
it's very.
You're talking about your self-sufficient artists,
right? The ones that are doing that are living off of their studio practice, which again is a very small percentage of people, but it exists,
right.
and I'd like to see it exist more.
But, I would be neglectful if I didn't ask you, what's your best thoughts toward young artists now? Like if you had 5 young artists, as you taught, as you spoke at Point Park and you counseled and you gave advice. I understand the business part of it, but there's got to be a lot of discouragement at times with younger artists too, because they probably can't see the future. It's really great to them probably.
I guess I would go back to when you say it that way, I think about my parents and the idea that they didn't want us to pursue it because it's so hard, and it is. I would not say that this is an easy thing to pursue. So you have to go into this feeling like there's really nothing else that would move you this way. If you're going into this profession because you think that you know how to paint and that's why, don't.
Because that could be a hobby, right?
Yeah, but that's not a passion.
Right, that's my point.
That's like, oh, I know how to paint. I know how to execute something. I know how to do this. I know how to do that. This is something that requires a great deal of desire, and it requires a great deal of self-exploration and vulnerability, which I think is really interesting because you have to really put yourself out there.
Let's extrapolate on that a little bit.
Let's do that.
Okay, so vulnerability means to me it means being willing to take a risk.
Yes.
Whether it's financial, whether it's emotional, whether it's reputation, could be anything, right? I mean, so talk about that. I mean,
oh my God, can I talk about vulnerability for a lot?
Absolutely,
I can talk about it. Probably ad nauseum. I think that it's often regarded, and I'm glad that you say that taking a risk, because that's actually an interesting way of viewing vulnerability. I think a lot of people view it as a pejorative, like you're vulnerable, you're exposed, you're open to like being hurt. No, I think being vulnerable is actually a strength. And I think if you, you really are putting that yourself out there in a way and putting all your cards on the table at all times, you're actually exhibiting a certain courage that is incredibly difficult to do. And maybe it's foolish at times, but like, what else are you going to do? And then I think it allows you to be a risk taker. When you are exposed and you acknowledge that you didn't die from the exposure, then you're like...
I get it.
Right?
I get it.
Then you're like, the risk? Okay, that's just another way to expose yourself. And once you can do those things and in a way that is... where you recognize what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, then you just move forward in that way. And I have often I talked to my eldest is 20, and she goes to school in New York, and we've spoken a lot about this idea of risk taking. And she has said to me, Mom, there's this thing with men specifically, where there's this great amount of fake it till you make it. And, it doesn't matter that you don't know what the job is or whatever. You're just going to figure it out along the way. And there's this confidence behind that. And I think that's rather societal. And I believe she thinks that is true. And she says with women, we feel as though we have to constantly, we have to explain ourselves. We have to explain what we're doing and why we don't know how to do this certain thing. And we apologize for the things.
Okay.
Interesting. I mean, I think this is rather societal.
It is interesting.
And she said, but you don't do that. She's like, you just always like put it out there and you know.
But what a great example for her.
And
though.
you've been very, and she's like, but you've been very lucky because it always works out. And I was like, is it luck though? Or is it just that when you put it out in a way that's confident and you believe in yourself? I think when you believe in yourself, the rest just sort of comes in.
That's the key. So let me venture to an area, and if you don't feel comfortable talking about it, we won't. But I'm going to share my quick story and see if this resonates with you, and if it does, I'd like to hear yours. So a little risky, right? A little risky. So I built a business that was like amazing, pretty successful. I had the opportunity to work with musicians that I had on my wall as a kid as a poster. Right? Really strange, fun, profitable. And my wife at the time didn't see the vision, or maybe she did. And then when things got a little tough, she kind of bogeyed on me. So, all right, that's what it is. Room for mistakes on both sides. There's no point, there's no blame here.
No looking backwards.
But what I'm saying to you is, though, to get over that or get through that, it was difficult in many ways because there was a rejection there. You know, by probably the quote unquote supposedly the most important person in my life.
Right.
So you question everything, right?
Right.
You question everything. And the one thing that got me through it was the reaffirmation of my clients and their joy of my work. That was the one thing. Now, my kiddos actually were a great anchor to pull me through too.
Yeah.
But if you separate the personal in terms of family and you look at the career part of it and the satisfaction of what I got, it was that it took me a while to wallow in my own bullshit for a little while, feeling bad for myself, crying like a baby in the middle of the floor of my apartment for a little while. I'll admit all that stuff. It was cathartic for me. That was how I dealt with it. But the point was, when I raised myself up by my bootstraps, and I had good friends around me saying, look, you built this flipping amazing firm, making people happy with ideas in your brain. Now, shame on you for letting anyone else stop that drive, that creativity, or your mission. And that kind of got me through it. I don't want an award for that. I'm just saying that was the drive, was that I validated my own work by the reception of others as to what I was doing as being valid. I needed that. Has any of that ever resonated with you whatsoever at all?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, I think that, but again, going back to like, when did I become confident again? And I was always really, really confident as a very young child. And it came from not like this sense of ego. It came from happiness. It came from being completely okay with who I was. At a
young age?
At a very young age.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
That persisted until middle school, and that's when everything fell apart. Adolescence is
so
really
is school,
hard time.
Right? When you're a kid, right?
Right. But I mean, if I reflect on it, I wasn't a popular kid. I wasn't the girl that all the boys liked. I wasn't anything. But I was confident because I believed in myself. And I think I finally have done this full circle now in life where, you know, it's the external stuff. Yes, does it matter? I'm not going to lie to you. Yeah, it's great. When I get validated with purchases or people talking about my work, yeah, it's super validating. It's wonderful.
Sure.
But without that, am I going to crumble, I guess, is the question. And I'm not, because I have come to that point now where I am more like my 5-year-old self than I am my 30-year-old self.
That's powerful. That's very powerful.
And
it's a good message.
It is, because that 5-year-old sees everything as possible.
Where do we lose that as humans?
Oh, God, so many ways, right? I mean, there are so many ways to lose that. And it's super sad. But if you can figure out, because we're all going to lose that. Let's just assume that we're all going to lose that. But if you can figure out a way to go back to that, and I didn't figure out a way, I guess it just sort of like organically happened that I came back to that. It's like seeing the world a new way again. And you can never be that 5-year-old. I've got all this baggage and experience and bullshit that comes with being 44.
Natural.
I'm not 5.
Oh, you're still a youngster.
I know, I'm so young.
But from my perspective, you are.
I'll be 45 next month. I'm climbing the ladder. Anyway, to be where I am, so let's face it, so we're middle-aged, right? So to be middle-aged, so taboo, it's so bad.
I hate people call me that, but it's true.
It is true. But to appreciate the child that exists in that, and to acknowledge the awe that the perspective a child has, I think that's where I am, and I think that's a really great place to be. And everybody who's really close to me knows that I have a lot of ups and downs. This is like not something that's easily maintained. You have a lot of moments of doubt where like, can I do this? Can I do this? And people who are super close to me see that doubt. And I think that's okay. I think you should...
do you need that as part of your art process?
Do I need it? God, I hope I don't.
Well, no, think about it for a second.
That's a terrible part of it.
Maybe to go through it, but I mean, that to me, I love confidence and confidence in anybody. I mean, one of the things I was always criticized for many years ago in the heyday of all this stuff, by some I was criticized for being arrogant, and I would really analyze that. And I would take it personally. Yeah. And I started reevaluating.
Because you're like, it's not arrogance, it's confidence.
Thank you. So I would go and reevaluate my video presentations or my written word or whatever, my advertisements for my product. And I think about, like, is that going to come off? And then finally I got to the point where, like, I am tired of, like, worrying about what other people's insecurities, how they view my stuff.
Right.
I know it's coming from a place of goodness and coming from a place of not bravado.
It's genuine.
It was genuine, but it took me a while. And I think that's I think sometimes I think the timidity of because let's face it, everybody is looking to be offended, or a lot of people out there are looking to be offended in some way because of their own insecurities. And if you're talented in your field, you're a bigger target. Would you not agree?
I
you had to have felt that already. I mean, come on.
Yes and no.
Oh,
yes, I
okay.
have felt people judging the commercial element of my work.
Naturally.
And feeling that made me a lesser artist.
Wait, stop. Again, please. I
know. Does that make sense? I feel as though it doesn't, but it does.
How did you? Are you reflecting on how you felt?
No.
Okay.
So
okay.
I feel as though there are people that view my work as just purely commercial, and therefore I'm a lesser artist because of that. And
has that been expressed to you ever?
Yeah, it has. not in any way that I care to discuss, but yes, it has.
Okay.
And that's fine. And I don't care, because what I do and what I produce is very uniquely mine, and it's very much part of who I am. And so for me to suggest or to say that I agree in any way with that perception of myself would be to say that I'm not being genuine, and everything that I'm doing is genuine. When I speak, I'm being genuine, to much of a lot of people's dismay, but it doesn't matter, because I'm putting out what I really believe. And I do that in my day-in-day interactions, and I do that in my art. And, this may all come to some cataclysmic end at some point. I have no idea. But in the interim, I'm just going to keep doing it and see what happens.
This has been amazing, my friend. Thank
you, Eric.
My glass is empty, and yours is almost there, but
Your glass is never empty. It's always overflowing.
That's right. And we're going to do this again, right?
Yes.
We're going to do this again?
Yes.
All right. Salute. Thank you so much. All right. That's the Italian in you, right?
Chin chin.
So what do you think about that?